Winter came early to the village of Hallowmere. It always did. Tucked deep within the Yorkshire moors, Hallowmere was the kind of place the rest of England forgot existed. No motorway passed near it. Mobile signals died miles before you reached the first stone cottages. Even maps seemed unsure whether the village truly belonged to the living world. Snow began falling on the last Sunday of November. By Tuesday morning, every road leading out of Hallowmere had vanished beneath white drifts taller than cars. The bus never arrived. It never even tried. Those who lived there understood the rule. When winter seals the village, you stay inside. Except for Margaret Hale. Margaret was 73, widowed, and stubborn in the way only people who had survived too many winters could be. She had lived in Hallowmere her entire life. She remembered the winters when livestock froze standing upright, when doors had to be dug open with shovels. But she had never seen fear in the village the way she saw it now. On the first night of heavy snow, Margaret noticed something strange. The church bell rang at midnight. Once. The bell hadn't been used in over 20 years. She opened her curtains slightly and looked toward the square. Snow swirled violently under the yellow street lamps, twisting the world into shadows and motion. Then she saw them. People. Standing still. Dozens of villagers stood outside their homes, unmoving, their backs straight, faces turned toward the church. They weren't dressed for the cold. Some wore slippers, others nightgowns. One man stood barefoot in the snow, his toes already darkening. Margaret opened her door. The cold struck her like a physical blow. "Arthur?" she called, recognizing her neighbor. No one responded. Slowly, stiffly, every head turned toward her at the exact same moment. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, empty. Margaret slammed her door shut. That night, she did not sleep. By morning, the village was silent. No smoke from chimneys, no doors opening, no footsteps crunching through snow. Margaret ventured outside. The cold was unnatural, sharper than frost should be. It burned her lungs with every breath. She went first to Arthur's house. The door stood open. Inside, the house was untouched. Fire cold. Kettle empty. Bed neatly made. Arthur was gone. So were the others. No footprints marked the snow. It was as though the villagers had been lifted straight out of existence. Margaret returned home shaking. By noon, the church bell rang again. Once. Against every instinct, she followed the sound. The church doors creaked open easily, as if they had been waiting. Inside, candles burned along the walls, casting long shadows across empty pews. At the altar stood the villagers, every missing soul. They stood packed together, shoulder to shoulder, faces pale blue with cold, eyes glassy and distant. And they were smiling. A voice echoed through the church, low, layered, not belonging to any single person. "Winter keeps what it finds." Margaret screamed. Every head turned toward her. And then they began to move. She ran. Snow slowed her legs, pulling at her boots like hands. Behind her, footsteps followed, dozens of them, perfectly synchronized. The village felt wrong now. Houses leaned inward. Windows reflected movement that wasn't there. The air hummed faintly, like something breathing beneath the ground. Margaret reached her home and locked the door, shoving furniture against it. The knocking began immediately. Soft, polite, rhythmic. She backed away, heart hammering. The knocking grew louder. Then came voices. Her husband's voice. Her mother's. Her own voice, whispering her name. Cracks spread across the walls as frost crept inward, crawling like veins. Margaret collapsed by the fireplace, clutching a photograph of her wedding day. The knocking stopped. Silence returned. Slowly, the door opened on its own. The villagers stood there, faces no longer human, skins stretched tight and pale, eyes reflecting candlelight that burned somewhere far behind them. The voice spoke again. Winter remembers. Margaret's scream never reached beyond the frozen walls. Spring came late that year. When hikers passed near where Hallowmere once stood, they found nothing but snow-covered ruins. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Only frozen footprints in the square, standing perfectly still, as though the village had paused mid-breath. And somewhere beneath the snow, a church bell waited patiently for next winter. The house at Glenrowan Lane was never meant to be lived in during winter. That was what the locals said. It stood alone on the edge of a Scottish village, half swallowed by forest, its roof sagging like an exhausted spine. No lights ever showed in its windows after November. No footprints ever led to its door once the first snow arrived. But Lydia Moore didn't believe in village superstitions. She was a grief counselor from Manchester, recently widowed, desperate to escape memories that followed her everywhere. When she found the Glenrowan house listed cheaply online, she took it as a sign. Silence, isolation, snow, healing. The first night, the snowstorm arrived without warning. Wind battered the walls. Snow slammed against the windows like handfuls of gravel. By morning, Lydia was trapped. The road had vanished entirely. That didn't bother her. What bothered her was the hallway. She woke to find snow on the floor inside the house. Not tracked in. Not melting. Perfect, powdery snow drifting gently from the ceiling. She stood frozen, staring upward. The ceiling was intact. No holes. No cracks. Yet snow continued to fall, slow, graceful, silent. She laughed nervously and brushed it aside, convincing herself it was stress, exhaustion, grief playing tricks on her mind. The snow vanished by afternoon. But that night, she heard footsteps above her bedroom. The house had no upper floor. By the third day, the snow returned, heavier this time. It fell in the living room, collecting in corners, covering furniture, muting sound. The house felt colder than the storm outside. Lydia called the village. No signal. She tried the radio. Only static, beneath it, faint whispering. That night, she dreamed of her husband standing at the end of the hallway, snow collecting in his hair, his eyes hollow. "Why didn't you come sooner?" he asked. She woke screaming. Snow lay thick on her chest. On the fifth day, Lydia noticed something horrifying. The snow inside the house remembered Shap's. Handprints appeared where she had brushed past walls days earlier. Footprints followed her from room to room, even when she stood still. Then came voices, soft, familiar. Her mother, her husband, her own voice, begging. The snow began falling faster. From everywhere. Ceilings, walls, even mirrors. The house shrank as drifts grew higher. Doors vanished. Windows disappeared. When Lydia finally tried to escape, she found the front door buried behind solid ice. Ice shaped like faces pressed from the other side, mouths open mid-scream. The last thing she felt was cold filling her lungs. When spring came, villagers found the house collapsed inward, packed solid with snow. Inside the frozen mass was a single hollow, shaped exactly like a woman kneeling. There are roads in Britain that no longer exist, not because they were destroyed, but because they were forgotten. Old detours swallowed by fields, wartime routes erased from maps, lanes that only mattered for a single winter and then vanished beneath grass and silence. Most people never think about them. Fewer still believe they can return. But every winter, when the snow falls thick enough and the world grows quiet enough, one road comes back. And it is hungry. Callum Reid had been driving lorries for 15 years. He knew bad weather. He knew snow, ice, fog, the kind of nights where headlights feel useless and every mile stretches twice as long. But nothing had prepared him for the blizzard that swallowed northern Cumbria that night. The storm came fast. One moment, the motorway was clear enough to manage. The next, visibility collapsed into a wall of white. Snow slammed against the windscreen so hard it sounded like stones. The radio dissolved into static. Then the GPS went dead. Callum slowed, heart pounding, watching tail lights ahead vanish one by one. When the warning signs appeared, road closed ahead. It was already too late to turn back. He took the last available exit. The slip road dropped him into darkness. No streetlights. No houses. Just open land buried beneath snow and the wind howling like something alive. That was when his headlights caught it. A narrow road cutting cleanly through the fields. Perfectly clear. No snow on its surface. No ice. Just wet, black tarmac stretching away into the dark. Callum frowned. He had driven this area dozens of times. There was no road here. No junction. No signpost. Yet there it was. The storm raged everywhere except the road. Against every instinct he had learned, Callum turned the wheel. The moment his tires touched the tarmac, the blizzard stopped. Not slowly, not fading. It simply ceased to exist. The world fell silent. The moment the thought formed, the lorry slowed on its own. No, he whispered, forcing his foot down. The road responded. A shape appeared ahead. A small wooden booth, illuminated by a single yellow lamp. A toll booth. The barrier was down. The lorry rolled to a stop. The engine died. Silence closed in. The booth door opened. Something stepped out. At first glance, it looked like a man. Tall, slender, dressed in what might once have been a uniform. But as it moved closer, Callum realized its body was not solid. It was made of frost. Ice layered upon ice, constantly shifting, cracking, reforming. Where its face should have been, features emerged and vanished. Mouths opening mid-scream, eyes forming then dissolving. "You took the road," it said. Its voice came from everywhere at once. Callum tried the door, frozen shut. "I didn't mean to," he said, panic rising. "I just needed somewhere safe." The thing tilted its head. "Everyone does." It raised one hand. Snow began falling inside the cab, slow and gentle, settling on the seats, the steering wheel, Callum's shoulders. "What happens now?" Callum asked. The thing smiled, or attempted to. "You finish the journey." The barrier lifted. The booth vanished. The road stretched on. And the lorry began to move again. Callum doesn't remember how long he drove after that. Time had no meaning here. The road narrowed, pressing in, forcing the lorry slower and slower until it finally stopped. Snow filled the cab, climbing his legs, his chest, his throat. The radio came back on. This time it wasn't his voice. It was dozens, whispering, begging, welcoming. The last thing Callum saw was the frost spreading across the windscreen from the inside out, forming shapes that looked like hands reaching back. In the morning, the blizzard cleared. Search teams found Callum's lorry abandoned in the middle of an empty field miles from the nearest road. There were no tire tracks leading to it. The cab was intact. The doors unlocked. Inside, frost coated the driver's seat in the shape of a man gripping an invisible steering wheel. No body was ever found. Every winter since, when snow falls deep enough, Drivers report a road that shouldn't be there. Clear, silent, inviting. And every year someone takes it and never comes back.